Imagine saying something completely normal to someone you love, and they just stop. No reply, no anger, no explanation, just silence. And within seconds, your mind starts collapsing in on itself. Did I say something wrong? Are they upset? Should I apologize? For what? If you've ever felt that spiral, keep watching. Because that reaction is not random, it is the entire point. The silent treatment is one of the most precise psychological weapons a person can use. No screaming, no insults, no visible damage, just absence. And somehow that absence controls everything. Most people dismiss it as immaturity, sulking, a bad mood, someone needing time alone. Sometimes that's true, but sometimes it isn't. Sometimes silence is not distance, it is strategy. And the reason it works is buried deep inside the brain. When someone suddenly cuts you off, your nervous system does not process it like a minor social inconvenience. It processes it like danger. Psychologists call this ostracism, being ignored, excluded, socially shut out. And brain imaging studies have found something disturbing. Social rejection activates some of the same brain regions involved in physical pain. Your brain reacts to being shut out as if something is wrong on a survival level. That is why the feeling is not just emotional. It becomes physical. The tightness in your chest, the knot in your stomach, the restlessness, the obsessive thinking, the urge to fix it immediately. If you know that feeling, then you already understand how powerful silence can be. Now here is where it becomes dangerous. The person using silence does not have to accuse you of anything. They do not have to explain what you did wrong. They do not even have to speak, because your own mind starts doing the work for them. You replay the last conversation. You examine your tone. You dissect your words. You question your timing. You start building a case against yourself. Notice what just happened. They went silent. And somehow, you became the one on trial. That is not a coincidence. That is leverage. The silent treatment works by removing the one thing your brain desperately wants during tension. Resolution. A normal conflict has movement. There is discussion, clarification, reaction. Even anger is still engagement. But silence freezes the entire process. Nothing moves. Nothing resolves. And the person creating that silence controls when relief begins. They decide when to answer. They decide when to soften. They decide when the connection returns. And after enough time passes, you start wanting only one thing, for it to stop. That is the trap. Because once the pain becomes strong enough, most people stop caring about fairness. They stop caring about truth. They stop caring who was actually right. They just want relief. So they reach out. They over-explain. They apologize too early. They shrink themselves. They take responsibility for things they are not even sure they did. And every time that happens, the silence gets stronger. Because it worked. If that sounds familiar, pause for a second and be honest with yourself. Have you ever apologized just to end the silence? Have you ever sent the second message, then the third, not because you were wrong, but because you could not tolerate the tension anymore? That is how conditioning begins. Over time, your brain starts learning a brutal equation. Their silence means danger. Their return means safety. And once that pattern gets repeated enough, you stop behaving according to your values. You start behaving according to what prevents the next freeze-out. That is when the control becomes complete. Not because they forced you, because they trained you. And this is why the silent treatment shows up so often in emotionally abusive dynamics. Not because every quiet person is abusive. Not because needing space is wrong. The distinction is simple. Space is communicated. Control is not. Someone who genuinely needs time will say that. They will tell you they need a moment. They will come back. There is still structure. There is still respect. There is still a relationship. But weaponized silence feels different. It is vague on purpose. It is prolonged on purpose. It is confusing on purpose. Its goal is not peace. Its goal is destabilization. And the more anxious you become, the more powerful the other person feels. That is the part most people miss. The person using silence is not always emotionally overwhelmed. Sometimes they are emotionally calculating. They are watching, waiting, measuring how long it takes before you bend, how long before you chase, how long before you give up your position just to restore contact. And that dynamic does not only happen in romantic relationships. It happens in families, in friendships, at work. A parent goes cold when you set a boundary. A friend ignores you when you do not comply. A manager suddenly withdraws after you raise a concern. A partner disappears emotionally every time they do not get what they want. Different setting, same mechanism. And what makes it so hard to escape is that when the silence finally ends, the relief is overwhelming. They text back, they smile, they act normal. They give you just enough warmth to calm your nervous system. And in that moment, most people do not confront what happened. They feel grateful. Grateful that the pain stopped. That relief is what seals the cycle. Because now your brain is not just afraid of the silence. It is attached to the reward of their return. So what do you do when you see this clearly? First, name it. The moment you identify the pattern, you break part of its power. You stop asking, "What is wrong with me?" and you start asking, "What is this dynamic doing to me?" Second, do not chase the silence. That is hard. It feels unnatural. Everything in your nervous system will tell you to fix it now. But chasing teaches the other person that withdrawal gives them control. And third, when they return, do not pretend nothing happened. Address it directly, calmly, clearly, without begging, without apologizing for their behavior. What was that? Why did that happen? And what happens next if it happens again? Because if there is no accountability, the pattern will repeat. The silent treatment survives in confusion. It survives when you call it moodiness. It survives when you minimize it. It survives when you think your pain must be an overreaction. It is not. Silence is not always innocent. Sometimes silence is a test. Sometimes silence is punishment. Sometimes silence is a way of teaching you that love can disappear the moment you stop complying. And the moment you stop fearing that silence is the moment the control starts to die.